All right, welcome back. Today we are with Stephen McClelland. Jim will join us in a moment. We're going to talk about when the owner passes away. So this kind of came up whenever Tiffany was on the podcast and talking about her experience with it. And so we wanted to bring on a pro that knew what the hell they were talking about and really how to handle things and how to prepare things and in case something does happen. So, Stephen, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks, Tyson.
So let's get started. Where do you want to start when it comes to getting prepared for when the owner does pass away? Meaning it could be us, right? It could be me. I could walk outside and get hit by a bus, which would be really hard because we're not on a street here. But if I walked out and got hit by a car or something, um, we got to be ready for it. So where do we want to start with that?
Well, you're right. I guess the two big issues are incapacity, right? Or what happens if you die suddenly. And something that we have in common is, the flying. And that really brought on a new meaning when my wife and I, started talking about us flying. And I took her on a date one night over to a state park, um, and she said, how's our estate plan? And I was like, well, I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney, and I thought I need to tweak this up just a little bit. It gets more real when your wife's life is in your hand, right? Uh,
Yeah, you're not lying. It really started like getting me to think more about my mortality. I mean, I remember flying, and it was like one of my first solos. Actually, it was one of my first solo cross countries, and it was the weather wasn't the greatest, right? And it really got me thinking about life in general, but like, okay, what happens like if me and my wife are in the plane and we crash, but also like what happens to the firm? Does the firm just go away? So yeah, it really does get you thinking. And Tiffany said, she said, I wish I had this training about 20 months ago. Thanks for doing this, guys. So important. Tiffany, thank you for sharing because you're the reason why we started this. So very, very good. But
and I listened to Tiffany's podcast, and it really it hit me because her story was very similar to my story. I am here because of succession planning, and so I guess that might be the best place to start. Is kind of how I got into what I'm doing, and things are a little different. Whether you're a solo or you have an associate or a larger firm, you're probably going to do different things, right? So when I was in law school, I started clerking for this older gentleman who had done estate planning and elder law for a number of years, and he had been looking for somebody to take over his practice. He wanted to slow down, take some time off, and so it was it was a perfect opportunity for me to kind of come in. I was young, I was hungry, right? I wanted to bring some great tech, and it was perfect. We had a great philosophy on life, and he was just the perfect mentor. And what happened there was he had cancer that there was a possibility it would come back. And sure enough, about a year before he died, they said I remember he came in this very office. He walked in and said, the doctor said, cancer is back and I've got a year to live. And at this point, it was the second round and it had metastasized. And so he said, we had talked about it many times before, but that's when it's a gut punch. I mean, you felt it. I mean, it was, it was terrible. So when I was listening to Tiffany's story, all those feelings of that moment, right? And so our plan was immediately, he said, I want to walk away from this. None of this matters. Like the clients don't matter. And so in our plan, we had a transition period of time. It wasn't a sudden death, which is kind of what we alluded to with the airplane. So there was the drafting of the motions to substitute counsel, taking over his cases. And so we had a plan we sent out a letter to his clients. We made sure the phone number transitioned over so I would have control over that number. which was very important because we do estate planning, and that phone number is everywhere. It's on business cards, it's in binders, right? And so keeping that number was extremely important for families. They'd call, and that would help business. That was a nice way to do a succession planning, if one can be a nice way, where you can think about it methodically, and have a smooth transition. I'll tell you a funny story about that. He tried to tell the bar, our local bar. He said, "Look, I'm dying and I want to surrender my license," and they wouldn't let him do that. They said they wanted him to go in front of a judge to declare he was dying. He got this random letter from the Supreme Court. He said, "This is stupid. I've got I got 9 months left. I'm not going to go spend my day in court declaring I'm going to die." And so he's like, "Would you please take care of this when I'm gone?" And so I had to send them letters afterwards, like months and months. They still wouldn't believe he died. And I'm like, "No, here's, that was a silly thing." I thought that was the most insensitive thing I think the bar could have done. I don't know why he couldn't just voluntarily surrendered his license. Interestingly, his malpractice carrier said, "You've been with us for so many years. We'll cover any tail coverage," which was interesting. As lawyers, you kind of want to think about maintaining that for maybe 3 years or so after you are done practicing, however much that is, just keeping that in reserves to pay that, because that's typically how our policies. We don't have occurrence-based policies. We kind of have to buy tail policies. At least that's what most of us have. So that was a joy. That transition was a joy, but that's not what I see in my state. We have a very rural state, and we have lawyers that just, their glory is to die in their office or die in a courtroom so the court reporter can get that final breath. I don't know. Do you guys see this in your states?
I see quite a bit when it comes to like traffic attorneys. I'm like, why are you still doing this? And they're still running around from court to court. But I haven't seen that in a while.
When we get the Missouri Bar Journal, I always check the back to see, 1, have I been disbarred, and 2, have I died? But most of the people in back who died, it's like 85, 87. But then you'll see someone that's like 38, and you're like, oh man. And then you'll see someone from your law school class. So yeah, I mean, certainly lawyers are working too long. Yeah.
And that's probably a discussion on making sure you set some money aside and retire. That's my plan. I want to be done at 65, right? I love what I do, but the truth is I want to be a grandpa. That's what I want to be more than anything in life. So that we had a guy in one of the towns where I have an office. He was literally taking clients 2 weeks before he was dying. Like, he had cancer too, and was signing up people 2 weeks. And we got another guy. He's 93, just still doing estate planning clients. And I'm thinking, you're not going to be there when the family is there. So I've done different things over the years. When I was after he passed, I was a solo for about 3 or 4 years, and so I had another attorney that I reached out to and said, if something happens to me, I'd like you to kind of manage this firm for me. And it was kind of an informal agreement. I see that a lot in our area. I had prepared a letter in the event of my death, and I told my wife, just give this letter to this attorney, and made sure my wife knew who this attorney was, because I love my wife. She doesn't work in my practice. She's a medical provider and doesn't know anything about law, right? So, and running a business would be disastrous for her. I'm sure she could do it. I shouldn't say that, but that's not her thing, right? So I said, look, this is a good attorney. She couldn't have told him. She wouldn't have known a good attorney from a bad attorney, right? And as attorneys, we have to come to the realization that we are replaceable, right? Cemeteries are full of irreplaceable lawyers, right? So of course, you'll never feel they'll take care of your folks the way you did, but you got to find someone similar, right? That it can at least help out. So I had that for a while. And that was a pretty good plan. And then, thanks to Maximum Lawyer growing, right, and hired an associate attorney. And so things got a little bit more complex, right? I got more people on staff, and having an associate attorney, I thought it'd be best that she take over for the practice in the event of my death. So a couple things we've done from a practical standpoint. This is very practical stuff. So number one is I set my payroll out typically every quarterly. I do quarterly reviews with everyone. So I set payroll out for 3 months. Okay, so if something happened to me, that's kind of taken care of. So there's at least 3 months. If I die on New Year's Eve, well, that might be a problem. But just getting people on salary is kind of my preference. Not, hourly is kind of a pain, right? If they're hourly, keeping up with the time. So I try to get them over to salary as quick as possible. So that was my number one. Their concern is I want them to keep working, right? Number two, as a estate planning attorney, we have very far horizons, right? And you would expect us to be thinking about the end in mind. That's something we repeat a lot in the guild. Start with the end in mind. What does intake look like? But the true end is when your practice is over, right? And so how can you set up your people for success? Well, if they don't want to stay there, well, write a letter of recommendation and stick it in their file, right? So if they do have to go somewhere, how impactful would that be? Is like, hey, my last wish, this employee has been amazing, and they've done well. The only reason why they're not working for me is I'm dead. They really couldn't have helped that, right? But something along those lines, I think, can be helpful for them, right? And then when you're talking to your people, and that's part of your quarterly meetings, that gives them some comfort that you're thinking really about them, right? That they're not going to be without a reference letter or something like that. Make sense? 72% of entrepreneurs lawyers, 72% of lawyers do not have a succession plan. That was from a 2017 Rocket Lawyer, a survey. 72%, and I believe that's true because I do trust. I do a lot of revocable trust to protect assets. So I get curious, and so I start looking up the lawyers in town. And it's clear that they haven't done any trust. Like their assets are still in their name, right? Of course, there's maybe some other ways they could have set things up. So the pauper with his kids without shoes is a big problem that we take care of everybody, but our own families aren't like taken care of, right? So I think that 72% is probably pretty accurate based on the people that I encounter and talk to. So y'all can interrupt me. I'm just kind of going on like some.
This is great. I didn't want to interrupt you. I thought you're doing a great job.
So I'll talk specifically about my spouse, right? So my associate is quite young. I've been practicing 10 years. She's been out a year, right? So for me personally, it's really not about the money. Like I have life insurance on me. So if I die, that's going to take care of my family, right? I really look at my associate taking care of the practice as a burden my wife doesn't have to worry about. Does that make sense? So when I was doing our family estate plan and I was tweaking it a little bit, most good powers of attorney will have like business powers of attorney in case somebody does have a business, right? So what I actually did was for my power of attorney I gave my wife, I stripped out all the business powers of attorney and I gave those to my associate. And I kept with my wife the ability to enter a buy-sell agreement, okay? So that my associate can run the practice, right? My wife doesn't have to worry about it, and she can just kind of enter in a buy-sell agreement. And we've kind of come up with a number that we've that we both feel comfortable with. I've told my wife, my associate, and it's not really about money. I mean, there has to be money in your operating account. You know, they talk about having maybe 3 or 6 months worth of income in there. This time of year, it seems like you have closer maybe to 6 months as opposed to 3 months, right? Because, you know, you just kind of build up, or especially personal injury guys, you guys make all your money in December, and maybe they write those checks for January, I guess, right? So, so there's operating income in there for a while, but it gives some flexibility to my wife to do a buy-sell agreement. What I've encouraged my associate to do is just get some life insurance on me, so that if I die, that life insurance can just pay off my wife. So part of losing that weight was to make those premiums. You're talking about losing weight beforehand. That's hopefully going to help the premiums, because I put on a little bit of weight over the last 3 years with some kids, you know, and all that good stuff.
You know, that's the idea of the insurance policy to pay off a spouse. That's not something I've ever considered. No one's ever given me that advice either. That's interesting. So would you suggest, let's say that I actually, you know what, Maximum Lawyer, let's use it as an example. Let's say, would it make sense for me to take out a policy, or Maximum Lawyer to take out a policy on each of us in case something were to happen to one of us, and then they basically pay off our spouse? Like, would you recommend something like that?
I've seen that a lot of businesses do that, like key employees, all that good stuff.
I was going to say, we did that at my old firm with the 3 partners. We all had that on each other. And if we're going to be doing insurance, this would be a good time, now that I've lost my weight, it'd be a good time to go in for a quote.
Becca, you hear that? We gotta get some insurance. Let's get it done.
We really need insurance on Becca is what we really need.
That's also true. Yes. Very good.
I think it's just, I think the older you get, the more you realize the value of these conversations. It was like 3 months ago, a lawyer had a significant car accident, driving down the highway in our small town. And that kind of shook him up, right? We don't take care of ourselves very well, health-wise, right? And we're under a lot of stress. Things can happen. So, you know, having just a few documents, I think, is helpful. So I think a business power of attorney is really helpful. You can just create a business power of attorney. If you don't have an associate, just give that to some friend, right? So that a business power of attorney is only good if you're alive. Does that make sense? Like a normal power of attorney, if I'm dead, you can't really use a power of attorney, right? So that's when you have to tweak kind of your operating documents and your business documents. So this is a good encouragement to do yearly minutes in your corporate book, wherever it is, right? Put yearly minutes that you met and you discussed how you want to do your succession plan. That should be in your minutes. There are some agreements to close your firm in the future that you can kind of create, which would kind of be the next step with that life insurance. That agreement can be in there. I don't have to worry about attorney-client privilege when I'm dealing with an associate, but if you don't have an associate or another attorney, you know, that's kind of an issue you have to be mindful of if a third party takes over that. I think it's important to set up your associate for success. So having a letter that she can send out to the client saying, "Hey, I'm going to tell you she's fantastic. She's been working with me this many years. She is going to service you and your estate plan and be there for your family. I'm sorry I wasn't," right? Can really be very impactful and help her have success. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. This may seem so silly, but like, what about like a video? Like what about like a video where like Jim sits down and records it? You know, like
if you're watching this,
exactly. If
that
you're
means
watching
I've been murdered on a desert island, and
one of those types of videos. What about things like that? You see those in like movies? Does that make sense?
Well, that's funny. That was kind of my hack of the week. Was gonna talk about, we have these great phones and we talk about them for promoting our business, right? And, running the law from the right way, but ending it the right way can also be done with these phones. And, if you have kids, I have daughters. And so my hack was going to be, if I'm gone, I mean, they've lost a significant male figure in their life. So I have videos that those girls can watch in the event I'm not there for high school graduation, their wedding. And I had actually I actually did this for my grandparents. My grandparents have videos to my daughters on the night before their wedding. I did that before they died, so they could be there at that moment. So these phones, this video, it's really a way to keep your voice and your impact far beyond your life.
That's really heart-wrenching, actually, to even think about my children doing that. But I have more of a, I guess, a more practical question about that. I mean, how do they get it? Like, where do you put this stuff? Like, what's your advice on where to put these things? I know that Tiffany's former partner had like a document, like a one document, like a one sheet, and he talked about it quite a bit. What about things like, how to get into your phone and like what happened? Like, it's like you can take and go, hey, I was Tyson's spouse. Can I get into his phone? I mean, Verizon's not going to do that for me. Apple's not probably going to do that for me, but I guess, I don't know how any of that works. I mean, what do you do in that situation?
So here's kind of how I've set things up. It's not perfect, right? But as far as the passwords for your firm, there are a lot of these 1Password ones that you can set up, like LastPass and whatnot. And so that's what we've set up for some of our firm accounts. Okay. But there are some master ones like the credit card or the bank accounts, and that, I wouldn't want my staff to get unless I die. Right. So there's you, and then there's what your staff immediately has access. And there's something in the middle, right? So it's very simple just to create a dummy account in the middle, right? It's never used unless you die, right? So that one master password at that time then would have access to everything, right? And you wouldn't give it to anybody until you died. So where you put that password, that 1Password, it would be important, so people could have access to it. It's not hard. As far as the videos for family, you can just set up a Gmail account. And if you have an idea for a video, just shoot it and stick it in that Gmail account. Give it to your best man. I talked to a buddy of mine a few weeks ago, and I said, hey, if I die, it's your job to walk my daughters down the aisle. And he was like blown away. And I was like, he's like, is everything okay? And I get that question a lot. And I was like, no, I just do estate planning, and I talk about death all the time. So, it's probably on my mind more than most folks. So those are kind of some ways that you can do that. The phone thing is tricky because of the biometrics that's set up on it. So that's why I like the LastPass extra email to bridge the gap between what you give them now and what you currently have.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, and Jim, cut me off if you got something. But
I did have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
My question was, Stephen, we talked a lot about death, and at the beginning you had mentioned disability. So I'm wondering, are there special concerns, or, I mean, obviously I think everybody should have good disability insurance, long-term, short and long, I guess. But are there other considerations when the person doesn't actually pass away?
So there's a lot of things, comas are the big question. Are they going to make it? Maybe I need to be in a coma for 3 months, right? And that's why having, maybe it's just some kind of car accident. My body needs to heal before they wake me up, right? That's why the business power of attorney is so important, because that can run the business while I'm incapacitated, right? Long-term care insurance, I about 6 months ago, the bar had somebody, like the local bar, and I reached out to them, and they were just a mess. Like, I sent them information, I applied for it, had to tell them I'm a private pilot, right? And for whatever reason, they haven't gotten back to me about that, but I can't remember what the quote is. They had a quote. It wasn't really that much. I mean, from the amount of money that you can get, up to 10, 20, 10 to 15,000 a month or so. That you got to. I looked at it and I thought, well, full-time care for me. Let's say I need a full-time caregiver, right? That's going to eat up maybe 40,000 a year, right? And then that doesn't even replace any income, right? So I do think that my partner had long-term care insurance, and then he got rid of it when he was 65 because he said it's hard for lawyers to be disabled. Like, we would really have to be in a coma. They can will us to work, right? If a hand's not working, we can still work. So to meet those qualifications of being disabled is kind of hard. So he got rid of his when his net worth was high enough that it didn't really matter to have that replacement income.
I mean, let's say that we do everything you're talking about doing, and let's say that something bad happens. Like, you talk about setting up the payroll, right? But let's say that you've got the business power of attorney, so someone can make some of the decisions. But like, do you stop paying your bills? Like for the business, like, how does all that stuff start to play out? Because I mean, I mean, if this were to happen right now, honestly, in my firm, I don't think people would know what the hell to do. I need to do a better job of having that succession planning. So, like, what do people do whenever that happens?
So first, most of everything we have is set up on auto pay, right? So there's not a whole lot of paper bills that are sent to us. It's frustrating because some of the paper bills we get are actually, this will be automatically deposited, or withdrawn, right? So I'm like, I don't need this extra paperwork, right? But we have a list we have 3 different offices. So each office has different utilities, right? And having that power of attorney and having things auto set up, that gives you plenty of time to get those power of attorneys to those utility companies. Because typically the way it works is you can't just walk into a bank and use a power of attorney. Typically they have to send it to their legal team. And then within 24 hours, they'll say, okay, yes, we'll recognize this power of attorney. Make sense? So one of the issues you have to think about is, do you want the power of attorney to be effective immediately, or do you want to have 1 or 2 doctors saying you're incapacitated to take over? And when I do estate planning, I'm like, I really don't want to have to get 2 new doctors to say you're incapacitated just to use something, right? So for personals, for individuals, I don't do that. I just make them effective immediately. Because if you don't trust that person, I don't know why you're not naming them power of attorney. But you may want to have 1 doctor to have to sign off and say you're incapacitated before it's effective. So that's a little nuance about your personal versus your business power of attorney. But it's gonna take a while to. The best thing I can tell folks for estate planning is write everything down. And I'll tell you, in the I don't know how many 1,000 meetings I've had with people, clients get richer in estate planning meetings unlike any other meeting. They have, oh, I forgot about this $20,000 and this $5,000 account. And so they're like, oh, so everybody today, if they do nothing, should just get a piece of paper and write down where their assets are, right? And that, if you just do that, you're going to save a huge headache for everyone, because you don't want them to go on a treasure hunt to find things, right? So that's what I'd say about trying to make that as easy as possible for them. It's gonna be terrible anyway, right? I mean, there's going to be issues, but I think we can do a lot that can help a lot.
So when it comes to the business side of things, though, like, where do you put those documents? Do you make sure you tell everyone in your firm, or do you tell like 1 person or another person? Like, where do you store this stuff so that from a business standpoint, I'm not really talking about from the personal standpoint, but from like a business standpoint, like, do you go out and you get a save? Like, what about things like that?
Oh, someone mentioned a firm Wikipedia like years ago, right? So we have a firm Wikipedia that's got that information on it, where those utilities are. I don't really care about that. I try to make it as simple as possible, right? I mean, you just put the account numbers on there. The business, all my associate needs to know is where I bank at. She knows because we set up a firm expense account. So instead of them having access to our major account, we have a smaller account that has less money in it. So if they were to commit fraud or something, right, it's not going to affect everything that's in there. So they know where we bank at, right? And you can give that bank a copy of those powers of attorney. And we're a small community, so they're going to know what's happening. You know, everybody knows everybody to some degree. Or if something happened to me or you guys, I'm sure people would know. And so that's so you can put it in your. We have a safe. I think everybody has a combination of my safe. You can put it in the Affirm Wikipedia. I mean, I guess we typically say don't give out your password, right? That's what we tell people, right? But I think it's important to at least like the master password. Maybe that's something that you put in a safety deposit box, right? You don't change that. And you, on that safety deposit box, you say, okay, I want this person to have access to it, right? And so they can go in there and get access to that code. I don't think there's any really wrong way to do it. I think many of us, we want the perfect plan before we do something, right? And I have heard over and over again, a plan that's executed is better than a perfect one that doesn't get done. So I wouldn't get so caught up in the details that you don't do anything. I would do something, and you're going to tweak it, and it's going to be so individualized for your firm and what's best for you. We often say, don't let the person you want to be hate who you are today, right? Don't let the perfect succession plan, hate who you are today. Just do something, right? So I'm just taking words that other people have said and applying. Everything applies, I think, to succession planning too.
All right, so I'm going to ask you one last question, then Jim, let Jim ask the last question if he's got one. But not the personal stuff, not the will, not the trust. Like if you're gonna put together one document for your firm, like what should that document be?
One document for the firm. It's hard. If I just said the business power of attorney, it doesn't help when I die, right? I would say in your corporate documents, have a succession plan in those corporate documents, because I can give that to a bank in the event of incapacity or death, and they can know who's in the trust. So that would be the document I would make sure it says what you want to happen.
All right. So two things. One, I do have one more question. Tyson, I think we should, if it's okay with Stephen, I think we should make this an episode of the podcast.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll need to record an intro and all that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, you and I can do that. Yeah, yep. Yeah. Stephen, one of the things you said, and I think it's one of the most important pieces of this about getting people to move, and that is that you said it's going to be horrible anyway, right? Like what we're talking about are worst case scenarios, situations where a spouse or children or employees are left without a mother or father or partner or boss. Can you talk a little bit about how, or if you've seen effective ways for people to sort of process that and work through that? I mean, my buddy Jim McClelland, who does a lot of estate planning, he told me that he had probably 10 estate plans that he'd been fully paid for, and he tried his best to get the people to come in and sign it, and they wouldn't, just because I think there was some mental block about death, right? Do you have any tips for anybody on that?
Well, most of the folks who do talk to an estate planning attorney, I ask them what are their goals, and they say, I want to make things as easy as possible for my kids, right? And that's what all of us as parents want, right? We always care about them. And so that is extremely motivating. The truth is, estate planning and succession planning is very altruistic. I think that's the word, right? It's something you're doing for someone else, right? You could just leave this world like many lawyers do and just die and let others clean up the mess. But most say, it's bad enough that I'm gone. I don't want them to have a mess to clean up. So that's the conversation. And the silent generation, which is the 77 and 97-year-olds, they don't talk about anything. The baby boomers, 77 to 57, are much better because they dealt with no communication, having no idea what's going on. So I'm seeing more discussions and more openness and transparency with the baby boomers children than with the silent generation. So there's generational impacts to how people view the end of life. And just, I think it makes you live more fully whenever you talk about the end, right? That, you know, my kids know, my dad talked about it, right? And he was ready, you know, that's the goal. We can't be here forever. So.
It's great stuff. All right, we're going to wrap things up. Before I do, I want to remind everyone to join us in the big Facebook group. There's a lot of great information being shared there every single day. If you want a more high-level conversation, join us in the guild. Go to maxlawguild.com. We would love to see you in the guild. And while you're listening to the rest of this episode, if you don't mind leaving us a 5-star review, we would greatly appreciate it. Jimmy, what's your hack of the week?
My hack of the week is a podcast that I just stumbled upon. Now, some of you might have read the wonderful book Deep Work by Cal Newport, or the End of Email. Little did I know that Cal Newport has a podcast, and very interestingly, he handles things a little bit differently. So he does do questions from the audience to create his podcast, but you know, he's very much about being efficient with his time, and so he makes people email him the question or record it, and then he puts that into the thing. So he's not about the human interaction, right? He's about how do I get as much done as possible. I learned about his podcast because Tim Ferriss had a special episode a little while ago where he had parts of Tara Brash and Ryan Holiday and then Cal Newport. So like Cal Newport has a whole thing in there about, you know, time efficiency and time management, all that stuff. So the podcast, it's called Deep Questions with Cal Newport, and they're long episodes, but it's good stuff.
I just now subscribed to it, so thanks for sharing that. That's cool. Love it. All right, Stephen, we kind of teed you up before. It sounds like you already have a tip for us. So what you got for us?
So I was going to say, create videos for your team in case you're gone. And that way, what a way to soften that blow, if that's even a thing. Do that for your family. Do that for your kids. My partner died. He had letters that I remember him writing in the office that he didn't do videos, but he wrote letters to his kids after he was gone. And those notes, I think, can have such a great impact on how you are remembered and how you help them grieve your loss.
That's good. I'm gonna do that. I've already been writing a little book for my kiddos, so I'm gonna do something. And I think it'd be kind of cool to do like a private podcast for them. That'd be so cool. But I don't know. I'm gonna do something creative. Who knows if podcasts are going to be a thing in 10 years. I think they probably will, but you never know. But my tip of the week is an app. I've been doing a lot more TikToking and Instagramming reels, doing some reels, and a really easy editor while I'm just kind of hanging out. It's InShot. You do have to pay for it. They have a monthly one. You can do a yearly one. I just bought the lifetime one for like $34.99, so it's not super expensive, but it's really easy. Like all those TikToks and Instagram reels that you see, a lot of the edits you can tell are done in InShot. It's really easy to do. So you can even do like picture in picture with the videos. It's really cool. So highly recommend it. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I think this is great. I think it was a great idea of Jim to turn this into a podcast because we were just going to do this for the guild, but I think it is something that's pretty valuable for everybody. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. All the best.
Thanks, buddy. See you.